Superhighway by James Oldman. Chapter 1. The 5 o'clock whistle could be heard above the deafening noise of the hammer drill. Long before the dust settled, the small workforce made their way back to the base. It was very basic, 3 rows of wooden huts, which housed the 20 men that currently worked on the highway. Each hut had a small kitchen, toilet, shower, and sleeping quarters. Rocco hurried. He was tired. It had been a long shift, but at least he had something to look forward to. The hut he shared was the same as the others on the site, designed to house them all with no frills. They had a rota, which hung above the fridge with each name on it to make sure the hut was kept clean and tidy. This was followed grudgingly, no one wanting to be cleaning after a hard day's graft. The walls were bare wood, the floor wooden, and a much-stained rug lay in front of the fireplace. A bright pair of polka-dot curtains added a touch of home from home, courtesy of Adrian, who wanted to think of Rocco living in a hut, just like their home was. He had taken a bit of stick when he had put them up, but he did not want to disappoint her. And anyway, every time he looked at them, he was reminded of home. Ah, home. What a wonderful place to be at Christmas, thought Rocco, as he kicked off his heavy steel-capped boots and headed for the Spartan washroom. Hey, buddy, is this the week all the family are coming north to Greensville? I bet they're all worked up about seeing the new house. Yeah, new house, sure, thought Rocco. Not much of a house. The only reason I got it from the company was because I wouldn't need to spend so much time traveling up and down the highway. Still, once things get settled down with all our furniture and things, Adrian will soon give it the woman's touch. His mind wandered. He and Adrian had been married for almost 16 years and had been blessed with 2 children. Turmel was almost 15, and his sister Molly was 8, going on 18. She was more than a match for her older brother, and often cut him down to size with her childlike adult ways. Turmel usually took it all with a pinch of salt. He really loved his sister, although he was cool enough never to show it openly, so for most of the time, put up with her little antics. Rocco's thoughts returned to his friend's question. Bill had been with him for most of their working lives on the highway. They had met at school and had shared many adventures together. Although he had always lived and worked around the Superhighway, Bill's folks weren't from these parts. Rumor had it that his father had arrived from overseas, coming from a place called Oz, or as Billabong called it, Down Under, with a load of iron ore. It was over a year since Bill had moved north, and because he had never married, he was glad at the prospect of his lifelong friend living beside him once again. He had enjoyed playing with the children and relaxing in their comfy home, and especially Adrian's home cooking. Yeah, once I'm all cleaned up, Bill, I'll hit the highway, and hopefully Adrian and the kids will have the packing done. So it will just mean loading up. Some of it will be quite heavy, but I think we'll manage okay. Hey, buddy, if you want me to take my truck down as well, you just have to say the word. Thanks, Bill. I know that. But we are almost through the last layer of rock, and if we break through before Christmas, we should get a bonus. So thanks, but no thanks. You stay here and check all the equipment ready to start first thing on Monday. Rocco left Bill muttering something about making enough extra explosives to blow the rock face into oblivion, then headed out the door towards his truck. It was an old truck with a leaf tailboard and high front wheel arches tapering to running boards painted a shiny black. It had once belonged to the demolition firm, who sold it cut price to Rocco when they no longer needed it. He turned the key. The old engine spluttered into life, and a blast of thick black smoke spewed from the exhaust. Ready to rock, thought Rocco, as the truck drove out of the car park towards Route 65. Adrian, looking at all the items still to be packed, was exhausted. Boxes filled every room, yet there was still more to go. How had they collected all this stuff? And would they manage it all in? Still, she reminded herself, once they got the truck loaded, they would be off to a new life in a new town, and all their treasured possessions would make the new house feel like home in no time at all. It was all very exciting, even though it was tiring, and Molly and Turmel were actually not being a lot of help. Every cupboard they helped to empty seemed to yield more treasures they could not bear to part with. The only downside, she thought, was Grandpa, who was getting on in years. He had lived all his life in the South and had been one of the pioneers of the highway in its early years, and often spoke of the planning strategy that had been used during its construction. He was old and frail now, but he loved it when Rocco came home and told the tales of how the highway was progressing. Grandpa always offered advice, and Rocco, like the devoted son that he was, listened. He did not have the heart to tell him how much technology had changed things. Grandpa's methods were great in his time, but the past was past and things had moved on. Grandpa's great loves were his 2 grandchildren, whom he just adored. Termal was growing up fast, quite a young man. Soon, probably, he would follow in his father's footsteps and work on the highway. Molly, on the other hand, was still very much a little girl and loved listening to her grandpa tell his stories. Even last night, in the midst of all the packing, Grandpa had offered to tuck Molly in with a bedtime story. Adrian had smiled as she listened at the door as he began the familiar story again. It would be amazing if Molly could stay awake to hear the end. "Well, Molly," whispered Grandpa, as she made herself comfortable under the thick pink duvet. "In the old days, towns and villages were dotted about all over the place, making it almost impossible to get from one location to another. So the only way to move about was to go to the surface when it was dark, find another molehill, and then disappear down the hole to the next village. This was dangerous, because moles cannot see in the bright light, and we could not move about easily. Lots of us were caught. Then one night, one of our people was on the surface and looked up at the sky, and amongst the millions of bright stars, one stood out alone. It has been known amongst our people ever since as the Great North Mole Star. The elders called a meeting and decided if a big tunnel could be built which ran up and down the length of all the villages, a sort of superhighway, then movement would be much easier and safer. Grandpa droned on and on about different routes leading off the superhighway, then phone lines carrying warning bells in case the highway was entered by a hostile source. But by this time, Molly's eyes had started to close, and little snores could be heard as she fell into a deep sleep yet again. "Ah, well," chuckled Grandpa, as he pulled himself out of the chair and quietly switched off the dim light. "One day she will stay awake long enough to hear the end of the story."